The day they accused me of stealing, I learned something about rich people. They could buy almost anything, except the truth. My name is Emily Carter, and 3 days before a billionaire changed my life forever, I was standing in the grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate with a torn uniform sleeve and every eye in the room fixed on me. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly somewhere behind me. Expensive laughter echoed through the hall. And in the center of it all stood Vanessa Blake, beautiful, elegant, and smiling as if she had already won. "Search her bag," she said. The words floated through the room like smoke. My heart slammed against my ribs. Not because I was guilty, because I knew nobody there would believe I was innocent. 2 security guards stepped closer. Around us, guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos pretended not to stare. The billionaire owner of the estate stood near the staircase, watching everything unfold with those cold gray eyes that missed nothing. Alexander Whitmore, the man whose name appeared on skyscrapers, hospitals, and magazine covers. The man who had barely spoken 10 words to me since I started working in his home. He looked at me the same way someone might look at a crack in expensive glass. Disappointed. Detached. Final. I swallowed hard and tightened my grip on the cleaning cloth still hanging from my hand. 3 days earlier, my biggest problem had been finding enough money to help my younger brother Noah pay for another medical appointment. 3 days earlier, I had never stepped inside a mansion larger than my entire apartment building. 3 days earlier, I still believed hard work could keep your life simple. Standing there now, surrounded by wealth I could barely imagine, I realized how wrong I had been. Vanessa folded her arms. "Well," she asked, "if she has nothing to hide, she won't mind." A few guests nodded. Someone whispered. Someone else smirked. The humiliation burned hotter than anger. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I lifted my chin. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Search whatever you want." The room fell silent. Even Vanessa looked surprised. Maybe she expected tears. Maybe she expected begging. But my mother had taught me something before she passed away. When people try to take your dignity, don't hand it to them yourself. Across the ballroom, Alexander Whitmore's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not softer, not kinder, just different. Like for the first time, he was actually seeing me. I didn't know it then, but that moment would become the beginning of everything. Because 3 days earlier, when I walked through the gates of the Whitmore estate for the very first time, I thought I was arriving for a housekeeping job. I had no idea I was walking straight into the story that would change both our lives forever. 3 days earlier, the city was still asleep when my alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning. Outside my apartment window, the streets of Brooklyn were dark and wet from an overnight rain. Inside, the radiator rattled like it was trying to survive one more winter. I rolled out of bed quietly and checked on Noah before anything else. He was asleep on the old couch we had turned into his bed after selling most of our furniture to cover medical bills. A blanket had slipped to the floor. I pulled it back over his shoulders and stood there for a second listening to him breathe. That sound always calmed me. It reminded me why I kept going, why I worked 2 jobs, why I ignored the exhaustion sitting permanently behind my eyes. The job at the Whitmore estate had appeared 3 days earlier like something out of a dream. The pay was almost double what I earned cleaning offices downtown. The hours were demanding, but I could handle demanding. What I could not handle was another hospital invoice arriving in the mail. By 5:15, I was on the subway holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Manhattan slowly appeared beyond the train windows, all steel and glass and impossible wealth. An hour later, a black iron gate taller than any building on my block opened in front of me. The Whitmore estate did not look like a home. It looked like a luxury hotel that had somehow become a private kingdom. Perfect gardens stretched across acres of land. Fountains sparkled in the early morning light. Even the driveway looked expensive. I stood there gripping the strap of my bag and wondering whether they had made a mistake hiring someone like me. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. A woman in her 60s stepped outside. Her silver hair was pinned neatly in place. Her posture was so straight it made me stand taller automatically. "You must be Emily," she said. "I am Mrs. Grayson. I manage the household." I nodded. "Nice to meet you." She looked me over carefully. Not cruelly, just thoroughly. "Follow me." The interior was even more intimidating. Marble floors reflected the sunlight. Massive paintings lined the walls. Everything smelled faintly of fresh flowers and lemon polish. My apartment could have fit inside the entry hall 3 times. There are 32 rooms, Mrs. Grayson explained as we walked. Mr. Whitmore values order, punctuality, and discretion. I almost laughed. Order and punctuality were easy. Discretion was practically my entire personality. She stopped outside a pair of tall wooden doors. "One more thing," she said. "Most employees rarely interact directly with Mr. Whitmore." "That will not be a problem," I replied. "Good." She opened the doors. "Because neither of you would enjoy it." At the time, I thought she was exaggerating. Looking back, I should have listened more carefully. Because less than 24 hours later, I would accidentally find myself standing face to face with Alexander Whitmore, and that single moment would change everything. The first day passed in a blur of polished wood, endless hallways, and quiet instructions. By noon, my feet already hurt. By 3 o'clock, I had memorized half the estate and gotten lost in the other half. Every room seemed larger than the last. A library with shelves that reached the ceiling. A dining room long enough to host 50 guests. A glass sunroom overlooking gardens so perfect they looked painted. The house was beautiful, but it felt strangely empty, like a place built for people who never had time to enjoy it. Mrs. Grayson assigned me to the East Wing that afternoon, dusting, organizing, and preparing several guest rooms for an upcoming charity event. Simple work, familiar work, the kind that allowed my mind to drift. I was folding fresh towels when I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. Not hurried, not loud, deliberate, confident. The sound seemed to carry its own gravity. I stepped aside automatically, expecting another staff member. Instead, a man turned the corner. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark gray suit without a wrinkle. The sunlight pouring through the windows caught the silver edge of an expensive watch at his wrist. For a second, neither of us spoke. His eyes met mine. Gray, sharp, the kind of eyes that noticed everything. I knew immediately who he was. Alexander Whitmore. My stomach dropped. Not because he was intimidating, although he was. Because I suddenly remembered Mrs. Grayson's warning. Most employees rarely interacted directly with him. Unfortunately, I was apparently not most employees. He glanced from me to the stack of folded linens in my arms. Then back to me. "You are new." His voice was calm, deep, controlled. I nodded. "Yes, sir." "How long?" "Today is my first day." He seemed to consider that. Not judging, just observing. It felt like being evaluated by someone who spent his life making important decisions. Then his phone vibrated. He checked the screen briefly. Whatever message appeared there did not improve his mood. "Carry on," he said. 2 simple words. Yet the moment he walked away, I realized I had been holding my breath. I released it slowly and laughed at myself. He was just a man. A very wealthy man. A very serious man. But still just a man. Or at least that was what I told myself. The rest of the afternoon went smoothly until nearly 6 o'clock. Mrs. Grayson asked me to deliver several files to a private office on the 2nd floor. "Leave them on the desk," she instructed. "Mr. Whitmore is expected back later." Easy enough. I climbed the staircase, crossed a quiet hallway, and entered the office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline in the distance. The desk itself was spotless except for a few neatly organized documents. I carefully placed the files down. Then my sleeve caught the handle of a coffee mug sitting near the edge. Time seemed to stop. The cup tipped. Dark coffee spilled across several papers. My heart nearly stopped with it. Oh no, oh no, oh no. I grabbed the nearest cloth and tried to contain the damage. But the stain spread across the page. Footsteps sounded behind me. And before I could even turn around, I knew exactly who had just walked into the room. My blood turned to ice. I stared at the spreading coffee stain while the silence behind me grew heavier with every passing second. Slowly, I turned around. Alexander Whitmore stood in the doorway. The evening sun cast long shadows across the office, outlining the sharp lines of his suit and the controlled expression on his face. His gaze moved from me to the documents on the desk, then back to me. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in years, I genuinely did not know what to say. "I can explain," I finally managed. The words sounded weak even to me. His eyes settled on the papers. He walked toward the desk without rushing, without showing anger. Somehow that made it worse. I stepped aside immediately. "The cup tipped over," I said. I was delivering the files, and my sleeve caught the handle. "I am so sorry." He examined the documents for several seconds. The office felt impossibly quiet. Outside the windows, the city glowed beneath the fading light. Inside, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. These were revised contracts, he said calmly. I swallowed. I know. And now they are not usable. I know that too. His expression did not change. Neither did his tone. Do you often destroy paperwork on your first day? Under different circumstances, it might have been a joke, but I was too nervous to tell. Heat rushed into my face. No, sir. Another silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. He pulled out a chair and sat down. Instead of continuing to criticize me, he picked up the least damaged document and began reading through it. The digital copies still exist, he said. I blinked. They do. Of course they do. Relief hit me so quickly my knees nearly gave out. Then maybe I can help reprint everything. You can. He looked up. You can start by not standing there like someone waiting for a jury verdict. I was so surprised that a laugh escaped before I could stop it. The moment it happened, I regretted it. Yet Alexander simply watched me. For a brief second, I thought I saw the corner of his mouth move. Not quite a smile, but close. Sorry, I said quickly. Do not apologize for laughing. His voice softened slightly. Most people in this house do not laugh enough. The statement caught me off guard. It sounded less like criticism and more like observation. For the first time, I noticed the exhaustion hidden beneath his composed exterior, the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the tension he carried even while sitting still. He was younger than I expected for someone who controlled such a massive business empire. Yet somehow he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. A knock interrupted the moment. The office door opened before either of us could respond. A woman stepped inside wearing an elegant cream-colored dress and an expression that immediately told me she belonged here far more than I ever would. Blonde hair, perfect posture, perfect confidence. Her eyes landed on me first, then on the stained documents, then on Alexander. Well, she said coolly. Who is this? Something in her tone made the room feel colder. Alexander leaned back in his chair. Emily Carter, he replied. She works here. The woman smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. Interesting, she said. I think we need to have a conversation. The woman crossed the office with the confidence of someone who had never doubted she belonged wherever she stood. Even before Alexander introduced her, I knew exactly who she was. Vanessa Blake looked like she had stepped out of a luxury magazine. Everything about her was polished, controlled, expensive. She glanced at the coffee-stained documents again before turning her attention fully toward me. So this is the new employee? She asked. Alexander nodded once. Emily Carter. Vanessa smiled politely. The expression never reached her eyes. You certainly made an impression quickly. Heat crept into my face. The accident was my fault. Clearly, the single word landed harder than I expected. I lowered my gaze and focused on the folder still sitting on the desk. Part of me wanted to disappear. Another part refused to give her the satisfaction. Alexander stood and gathered the damaged papers. The issue has already been handled. Vanessa's attention shifted to him. You are being unusually forgiving. It was a mistake. Mistakes can be expensive. The room grew quiet again. I sensed something passing between them that had nothing to do with me. Familiarity, history, expectations neither of them bothered explaining. Finally, I picked up the empty coffee cup and stepped back toward the door. I should get back to work. Vanessa did not respond. Alexander looked at me briefly. Mrs. Grayson will have additional assignments for you tomorrow. Yes, sir. I left before anyone could say anything else. The moment the door closed behind me, I released a breath I had been holding for what felt like an hour. The rest of the evening passed slowly. By the time my shift ended, the estate had settled into silence. Staff members disappeared into their routines. Lights dimmed across the enormous house. I was preparing to leave when I noticed something unusual. A light remained on at the far end of the east wing. Most of those rooms were rarely used. Curious, I walked closer. Soft music drifted through a partially open door. Not loud, just enough to hear. I hesitated. Then a weak voice spoke from inside. Is someone there? The voice belonged to an older woman. I gently pushed the door open. The room felt warmer than the rest of the estate. Family photographs lined the shelves. A knitted blanket rested across the lap of a silver-haired woman sitting beside the window. Her eyes brightened slightly when she saw me. Oh, she said. You are not Clara. I blinked. I am sorry. I think you have the wrong person. She studied me carefully, then smiled. No, not Clara, but kind eyes. Something about the loneliness in her expression squeezed my heart. I am Emily. Margaret Whitmore. Her voice carried quiet elegance. Alexander's mother. I froze for a second before stepping farther into the room. Of all the people I expected to meet that night, she was not one of them. Margaret glanced toward the untouched dinner tray sitting nearby. Everyone keeps telling me to eat, she said. It becomes very exhausting. I looked at the tray and then back at her. Maybe they keep asking because they care. A small smile appeared, the first genuine smile I had seen in that house. And without realizing it, I pulled up a chair and sat beside her. Margaret and I talked for nearly an hour. At first, I expected the conversation to feel awkward. She was the mother of one of the wealthiest men in New York. I was a housekeeper sitting in a borrowed chair at the edge of her room. But none of that seemed to matter to her. She asked about my family, my neighborhood, my favorite books. She listened carefully to every answer, as if each one mattered. By the time I glanced at the clock, I realized she had finished almost half of her dinner. There, I said, smiling. That was not so terrible. Margaret looked down at the tray and seemed genuinely surprised. I suppose not. Then her expression softened. You remind me of someone. I thought immediately of the name she had mentioned earlier. Clara. Before I could ask, a quiet knock sounded at the door. Both of us looked up. Alexander stood in the hallway. For a second, nobody spoke. His gaze moved from his mother to the partially empty dinner tray. Then to me. Something unreadable crossed his face. You ate, he said quietly. Margaret folded her hands with a small smile. Apparently, I was persuaded. His eyes returned to me. Not cold this time. Not distant. Just curious. Mrs. Grayson said you finished your shift 40 minutes ago. I immediately stood. I am sorry. I was about to leave. Sit down, Margaret said. You were helping. Alexander stepped into the room. The atmosphere changed slightly the way it always seemed to when he entered a space. Not because he demanded attention, because attention naturally followed him. He looked at the empty chair beside the window and then at his mother. How are you feeling? Better. That is good. The exchange was polite, respectful, yet something felt missing. Like two people who cared about each other but had forgotten how to speak honestly. Margaret seemed to notice it too. You work too much, she told him. Alexander sighed. We have had this conversation, and you never listen. For the first time, I saw something close to amusement appear in his expression. It vanished quickly, but it was there. Margaret reached over and patted my hand. Emily listens. I felt suddenly trapped between them. Alexander glanced toward me again. Does she? She does. Margaret nodded firmly. Which is why she will come back tomorrow. My eyes widened. I will. Of course. She sounded completely certain. You are the first person who has convinced me to finish dinner in weeks. I looked toward Alexander, unsure whether this conversation was actually happening. To my surprise, he did not object. If Emily is willing, I see no problem. The simple statement should not have mattered. Yet something about hearing him say it created a strange warmth in my chest. Maybe because nobody had defended me all day except a woman I had met less than an hour earlier. Eventually, I gathered my things and headed downstairs. The estate was nearly silent now. Most lights had been turned off. The marble floors reflected the soft glow of wall sconces. As I reached the front entrance, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Alexander stood a few feet away. Emily. I stopped. Yes. He hesitated for the briefest moment. Thank you for spending time with my mother tonight. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. I smiled. She spent time with me too. For the first time since I met him, Alexander Whitmore smiled back. The next morning, I arrived at the estate 20 minutes early. The air carried the crisp scent of fresh-cut grass, and sunlight spilled across the enormous front lawn in long golden stripes. For the first time since starting the job, I felt something unexpected when I walked through the gates. Not fear, not intimidation, familiarity. Mrs. Grayson noticed it immediately. You look less nervous today, she said as she reviewed the morning schedule. Maybe I am getting used to the place. One eyebrow lifted. That would make you the first. The comment earned a smile from both of us. My assignments were simple enough. Organizing guest rooms, preparing the East Wing for upcoming visitors, assisting with a charity event scheduled for the weekend. Yet throughout the morning, I found myself thinking about Margaret, about the loneliness hidden behind her gentle smile. Around noon, I brought fresh flowers to her room. The moment she saw me, her face brightened. There you are. Good afternoon. You are late. I laughed. By 3 minutes. Still late. She pointed toward a chair. Sit. For the next hour, we talked about everything and nothing. Old movies. Favorite foods. Childhood memories. She told stories about Alexander as a boy. Apparently, he once spent an entire summer building birdhouses because he wanted to attract cardinals to the garden. I nearly choked on my tea. Alexander. Margaret nodded proudly. He was sweet before he became serious. And now? Now he thinks carrying the entire world on his shoulders is a personality trait. I laughed again. A deep voice spoke from the doorway. I can't hear you, Mother. Both of us turned. Alexander stood there holding a folder. Margaret looked completely unapologetic. Good. Maybe you will learn something. He sighed and stepped inside. For a brief moment, the room felt lighter than I had ever seen it. Less like a billionaire's mansion and more like a home. Margaret eventually excused herself for a medical appointment downstairs, leaving Alexander and me alone. The silence that followed felt different from our earlier encounters. Less uncomfortable, more uncertain. He glanced toward the flowers I had arranged on the table. She likes having you here. I looked down at the bouquet. I like being here with her. Most employees keep their distance. Most employees are probably smarter than me. That earned a quiet laugh. The sound surprised both of us. Alexander shook his head slightly. You say whatever comes into your mind, do not you? Usually. It gets me into trouble. I noticed. For a second, neither of us spoke. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. Dust floated lazily in the air. The moment felt strangely peaceful. Then his phone rang. The atmosphere shifted instantly. He checked the screen and his expression hardened. Business mode. The version of him the world expected. Before answering, he looked at me one last time. Emily. Yes. Thank you for giving my mother something to smile about. After he left, I remained in the room for several seconds, staring at the doorway. And for reasons I could not explain, that simple thank you stayed with me for the rest of the day. The following evening, rain tapped softly against the tall windows of the estate. Most of the staff had finished their duties, and the enormous house seemed wrapped in a quiet stillness that made every sound feel louder. I was carrying a stack of freshly folded linens down the east corridor when I noticed a light beneath Margaret's door. Normally, she would already be resting. Something felt different. I knocked gently. No answer. Concern tugged at me. I opened the door a few inches and peeked inside. Margaret sat alone near the window, staring out into the darkness beyond the glass. The room was lit only by a small lamp beside her chair. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile. Margaret, I asked softly. She turned and forced a smile. Emily. I stepped inside. Are you all right? For a moment she said nothing. Then her eyes drifted back toward the rain. Some days are harder than others. I pulled a chair closer. Do you want to talk about it? A sad smile touched her lips. You always ask that. Because sometimes it helps. She nodded slowly. Tonight would have been my husband's birthday. The words settled heavily between us. I suddenly understood the sadness I had sensed the moment I entered the room. Margaret folded her hands together. Alexander was very young when he passed away. He does not talk about it much anymore. Her gaze softened. But he loved his father very much. I listened quietly as she shared memories. Family vacations. Birthday parties. Summer afternoons in the garden. The kind of simple moments money could never replace. Eventually, she fell silent. The rain continued outside. Then something unexpected happened. She reached into a nearby drawer and removed an old photograph. This was taken a year before everything changed. I accepted the picture carefully. A younger Alexander stood between his parents, smiling openly. Not the controlled smile I had seen a few times recently. A real one. Bright. Unguarded. I stared at the image. He looks happy. He was. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. Sometimes I worry he forgot how. Before I could answer, movement caught my attention near the doorway. I looked up. Alexander stood there. Neither of us had heard him arrive. His eyes settled on the photograph in my hands. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his face. Then it disappeared behind the familiar calm expression. Mother, he said gently. Margaret smiled. We were talking about your father. Alexander entered the room slowly. The silence that followed felt meaningful rather than uncomfortable. Finally, he looked toward me. Thank you for staying with her. I shook my head. She should not have to spend difficult days alone. His gaze lingered on mine for a second longer than usual. Not because I was an employee, not because I had done anything extraordinary, but because for the first time, I think he realized I genuinely cared. And somehow, standing there beneath the soft lamplight while rain whispered against the windows, I realized something too. The man everyone admired from a distance was carrying far more loneliness than anyone seemed willing to notice. Over the next few days, something subtle began to change inside the Whitmore estate. I noticed it first at breakfast. Margaret was eating more. Not because anyone insisted. Not because a doctor told her to. She simply seemed more present. More engaged. The staff noticed it too. Mrs. Grayson mentioned it one morning while reviewing schedules. Her appetite has improved. She tried to sound professional, but I could hear the relief underneath. That is wonderful. It is. She studied me for a second. You have been good for her. The compliment stayed with me for the rest of the day. Yet the bigger surprise came later that afternoon. The charity gala was only 2 days away, and preparations consumed nearly every corner of the estate. Florists moved through hallways carrying arrangements. Event planners reviewed seating charts. Caterers arrived and departed with military precision. Everyone seemed busy except Alexander. Not because he lacked work, because he somehow carried enormous responsibility without appearing rushed. I was arranging fresh flowers in the main library when he entered. His attention was fixed on a tablet filled with reports. He stopped when he noticed me standing on a small ladder adjusting a display shelf. You are going to fall. I glanced down. That is very encouraging. I am serious. I am almost finished. The moment I said it, the flower vase slipped slightly in my hands. My heart jumped. Alexander crossed the room instantly. The vase remained secure, but his expression suggested I had just proven his point. Almost finished, he repeated. I climbed down carefully and tried not to smile. You were right. I am aware. The confidence in his voice made me laugh. For a second, neither of us looked away. Something warm settled into the silence. Not awkward. Not uncomfortable. Just unexpectedly easy. Then his phone buzzed. He ignored it. A second notification appeared. Ignored again. I frowned. Important. Usually. Then why are you not answering? He looked toward the window. Sunlight streamed across the shelves, illuminating thousands of books that probably had not moved in years. Because for 5 minutes, I would rather not discuss quarterly earnings. I stared at him. Did Alexander Whitmore just admit he is tired of work? Do not tell anyone. It would damage my reputation. The answer surprised another laugh out of me. The sound echoed softly through the library. Something shifted in his expression again. Not admiration exactly. More like wonder. As though he had forgotten what genuine laughter sounded like inside his own home. Neither of us noticed the figure standing in the doorway until a cold voice interrupted. Well, this looks comfortable. Vanessa Blake stepped into the room. Her eyes moved between us. The smile on her face never reached her eyes. Alexander immediately straightened. The easy atmosphere vanished. Vanessa folded her arms. I have been looking everywhere for you. Her gaze lingered on me for a second longer than necessary. Apparently, I should have started here. And in that moment, I realized she was not looking at an employee anymore. She was looking at a problem. After Vanessa left the library, the atmosphere never fully recovered. Alexander returned to his work. I returned to mine. Yet something invisible had changed. I felt it during dinner preparations that evening. I felt it when Vanessa walked through the estate speaking to staff members with a smile that seemed carefully practiced. Most of all, I felt it whenever her eyes landed on me. 2 days later, the charity gala arrived. The Whitmore estate transformed into something out of a movie. Hundreds of lights illuminated the gardens. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Guests in elegant gowns and tailored suits filled every room. Wealth, influence, and reputation gathered beneath one roof. Staff members moved quietly through the crowd, making certain every detail appeared effortless. I spent most of the evening carrying trays, assisting guests, and staying out of sight. Exactly where people like me were expected to remain. Around 9 o'clock, Mrs. Grayson asked me to retrieve additional place cards from a storage room near the east wing. The hallway was empty when I arrived. The distant sound of music drifted through the walls. I found the box quickly and turned to leave. That was when I noticed a velvet jewelry case resting on a nearby table. It looked expensive, very expensive. Assuming someone had misplaced it, I picked it up carefully. Before I could take a single step, voices approached from the hallway. The door opened. Vanessa entered first. Two event coordinators followed behind her. Her eyes immediately dropped to the jewelry case in my hands. For one brief second, something flashed across her face. Satisfaction. Then she gasped. Loudly. There it is. The room went silent. I frowned. What? Vanessa stepped forward. My necklace. My stomach dropped. I found this sitting on the table. Of course you did. Her voice carried through the room. The coordinators exchanged uneasy glances. I have been searching for it for nearly an hour. Confusion quickly became disbelief. You think I took it? Vanessa folded her arms. I think appearances are unfortunate. More footsteps approached. Guests nearby had already begun noticing the commotion. Within minutes, several people stood outside the doorway watching. Whispers spread rapidly. Questions followed. I felt every eye in the hallway settle on me. The girl from Brooklyn. The housekeeper. The easiest person in the building to suspect. Mrs. Grayson arrived moments later. Her expression darkened immediately. What happened? Vanessa answered before anyone else could. I found Emily holding my missing necklace. The accusation hung in the air. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Not because I was afraid of the truth. Because I knew how quickly people believed the worst when money was involved. I did not take anything, I said firmly. Vanessa tilted her head. Then perhaps you can explain why it was in your hands. I looked around at the gathering crowd. Wealthy strangers. Curious faces. Silent judgment. Then I saw Alexander approaching through the hallway. His expression unreadable. The crowd parted automatically as he moved closer. Vanessa turned toward him immediately. Alexander, thank goodness. We have a problem. The entire corridor fell silent. And suddenly, every person in that house was waiting to hear what the billionaire would do next. Alexander took one look at the necklace in my hands, and then at my face. The silence stretched across the hallway. Around us, guests waited. Staff members waited. Vanessa stood perfectly still, her expression carefully composed. I could almost feel the judgment building inside the crowd. One accusation. One assumption. One story everyone was ready to believe. Alexander stepped closer. Emily, he said calmly. Tell me exactly what happened. His question surprised me. He was not accusing me. He was asking. I swallowed and forced myself to remain steady. Mrs. Grayson sent me to retrieve place cards from the storage room. The necklace was already sitting on the table when I arrived. I picked it up because I thought someone had misplaced it. Then Vanessa walked in. Vanessa shook her head lightly. Convenient. A few people exchanged glances. The pressure in the hallway seemed to grow heavier. Alexander never looked away from me. That is all. That is all. He nodded once. Then he turned toward Vanessa. When was the necklace last seen? Her confidence appeared instantly. Before dinner. I wore it during the reception. And after that, I removed it because the clasp felt uncomfortable. Who was present? Vanessa hesitated for the first time. Only briefly. But I noticed. So did Alexander. Several people. Names. The hallway became even quieter. Vanessa listed a few guests and staff members. Alexander listened without interrupting. When she finished, he glanced toward the head of estate security standing nearby. Pull the camera footage from the East Wing. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Alexander, that is unnecessary. His eyes shifted toward her. A valuable family heirloom disappeared. His voice remained perfectly calm. I would say it is necessary. For the first time all evening, uncertainty crossed her face. My pulse quickened. Something was wrong. Alexander clearly sensed it too. 20 minutes later, a small group gathered inside the estate security office. Several monitors displayed footage from different hallways and rooms. The recording from the East Wing appeared on the main screen. Everyone watched. The storage room door came into view. The timestamp rolled backward. 5 minutes before I entered, Vanessa appeared on camera. The room fell silent. She stepped inside carrying the velvet jewelry case. My heart stopped. Nobody spoke. We watched her place the necklace on the table, then leave. Several minutes later, I entered exactly as I had described. The footage ended. Complete silence followed. No whispers. No excuses. No misunderstandings. Just truth. Vanessa stared at the screen as though willing it to disappear. Alexander's expression never changed. Somehow that made everything more devastating. Would anyone like to explain this? He asked quietly. Nobody answered. Vanessa opened her mouth. Closed it again. The room seemed to shrink around her. Finally, she looked toward me. Not apologetic. Not embarrassed. Angry. as though my existence had somehow caused her humiliation. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me, waiting, expecting, maybe even pitying. Slowly, I removed the employee badge clipped to my uniform. Then I placed it on the nearest table. Everyone stared. Emily. Mrs. Grayson looked confused. I took a breath. My voice remained steady. I came here to work honestly. I will not stay somewhere I have to prove that every day. The room froze. And for the first time since this nightmare began, nobody was looking at the necklace anymore. They were looking at me. The silence inside the security office felt endless. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My employee badge remained on the table between us like a line I had finally decided not to cross again. Mrs. Grayson looked heartbroken. Several staff members looked stunned. Vanessa looked furious. But the only person I could not bring myself to look at was Alexander. I turned toward the door. Emily. His voice stopped me instantly. I closed my eyes for a second before facing him. The room seemed smaller somehow. More personal. Less about the necklace and more about everything that had happened before it. Alexander stepped forward. You are not leaving. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. I think that decision should be mine. It is. His tone remained calm. And I am asking you to stay. The distinction caught me off guard. Around us, guests began quietly slipping out of the room, one by one, until only a handful remained. Vanessa folded her arms. Alexander, this has already gone far enough. He did not even look at her. No, it has not. For the first time since I had met him, there was steel beneath his voice. Not anger. Conviction. An innocent person was publicly accused inside my home. The words landed heavily. That is not something I consider finished. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. You are choosing her side? Alexander finally turned toward her. There are no sides when facts exist. The answer ended the conversation. Vanessa's expression hardened. A minute later, she walked out without another word. The door closed behind her. Nobody tried to stop her. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt exhausted. Emotionally exhausted. Physically exhausted. Tired of defending myself. Tired of being judged before speaking. Alexander seemed to understand. When the room finally emptied, he remained standing across from me. The noise of the gala continued somewhere beyond the walls. Distant music. Distant laughter. Another world entirely. Emily. His voice softened. Look at me. Slowly I did. The sincerity in his expression made my chest tighten. You changed this house. I blinked. What? My mother smiles again. He took a breath. She eats. She talks. She looks forward to tomorrow. I stared at him, unable to respond. The staff notices it. His eyes never left mine. I notice it. The room felt impossibly quiet. You think this is about a necklace? He continued. It is not. Something vulnerable appeared in his expression. Something honest. Before you arrived, this place felt empty. People worked here. People visited. Business happened. But nobody lived here. My heart pounded. Alexander, you remind everyone that kindness still matters. His voice grew quieter. Including me. The words hit harder than any grand declaration ever could. Because they were real. Because they came from a man who clearly did not speak them often. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Margaret's voice echoed from the doorway. Well, we both turned. She stood there smiling knowingly. It is about time somebody said it. My face immediately turned red. Alexander actually laughed. A real laugh. The sound warmed the room instantly. Margaret walked over and took my hand. Do not leave, Emily. Her eyes softened. Not because of this house. Not because of him. She squeezed gently. Stay because you belong wherever people value your heart. And standing there between the woman who had become family and the man whose walls were finally beginning to fall, I realized that for the first time in a very long time, I did not want to run away. The gala ended long after midnight. One by one, the guests departed. Luxury cars disappeared down the long driveway. Music faded. Laughter faded. Silence returned to the estate. Yet somehow the house no longer felt as empty as it once had. The following morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows while I helped prepare breakfast for Margaret. The familiar routine should have felt ordinary. Instead, every detail seemed sharper, brighter, as though the world had quietly shifted while I was not looking. Margaret noticed immediately. You are smiling. I looked down at the coffee cup in my hands. Am I? Yes. She looked entirely too pleased with herself. Interesting. Before I could answer, Alexander entered the room. He had already exchanged his suit jacket for a simple navy sweater. Without the constant armor of business meetings and public appearances, he looked different. Less distant. More human. His eyes found mine immediately. The warmth there made my heart stumble. Margaret rose from her chair. I suddenly remember an appointment. Neither of us believed her. She left anyway. The moment the door closed, silence settled around us. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that existed between people who no longer needed to fill every second with words. Alexander walked toward the window. Vanessa called this morning. I stiffened slightly. Oh, she wanted to explain. Did she? He nodded. I told her some things cannot be repaired by explanations. I studied him carefully. Was that difficult? A faint smile appeared. More difficult than any business negotiation I have ever had. I laughed softly. The sound seemed to make him relax. After a moment, he turned fully toward me. There is something I have wanted to say. My pulse immediately quickened. Alexander Whitmore was rarely uncertain. Yet now he looked almost nervous. When you first arrived here, he said quietly, I thought you were simply another employee. I smiled. That seems reasonable. It was not accurate. He took another step closer. You reminded me that success is not the same thing as happiness. The room felt very still. You reminded my mother how to smile again. His voice softened. And you reminded me how to do the same. Emotion tightened my throat. For a second, I could not speak. Finally, I managed a small smile. You did not make it easy. I know. We both laughed. Sunlight spilled across the floor between us. Outside, the gardens shimmered beneath a clear blue sky. Everything felt peaceful, simple, real, the kind of moment money could never buy. Alexander looked at me for a long time before speaking again. I spent years building companies, solving problems, chasing goals. His eyes held mine. Then you walked into this house carrying a box of cleaning supplies and changed more than any of those things ever did. I shook my head, overwhelmed. I did not change you. His smile deepened. Maybe not. He paused. But you helped me find the person I used to be. For a moment, neither of us moved. Neither of us needed to. Because some truths arrive quietly. Not with grand speeches or dramatic promises. Just certainty. Months later, people would ask how a billionaire and a housekeeper found their way into the same story. They always expected some extraordinary answer. But the truth was much simpler. He had everything money could buy. I had very little. Yet in the end, neither of us needed wealth, status, or perfection. We only needed someone willing to see beyond them. Because the most valuable things in life are never earned through power. They are earned through kindness. And sometimes, a heart is not stolen at all. Sometimes it is simply given to the person who finally teaches it how to beat again.